Hello and welcome to another video where today I'm going to be looking deep into core training, core workouts, and discussing whether in fact they're even necessary at all or in terms of the way they're done at the moment. So let's have a look at a bit more what I'm getting into. So for a long time I was confused as to, like I was led to believe, like everyone, that the core is all about planks and crunches and working your abs, and I become a qualified in Pilates and did all sorts of stuff, and I was told any injury, it's all to do with a weak core. But after years of applying these methods and principles, I came across this problem of how someone could be awesome and amazing at doing these things but still have back pain or still have knee pain or still have shoulder pain or whatever it is. So and in certain movements that would really struggle to do anything, and always sort of coming up against it, myself included. But like, how, if the core is supposed to make me prevent all these problems, how can I be so strong yet lose it in various other things? And you could even obviously see it. How come it's strong one second and completely weak the next? So this is where I started to lose faith in the things that I've been told, and started to look for new answers. So and more recently, and the reason for this video is because this year in particular I've been working a lot with ACL injuries, and core weakness is always something that's brought up when someone comes to see me about this. And sporting clubs, football clubs in particular, sort of adopting core workouts to prevent these really disastrous type of injuries. So seeing sort of planks and side planks and all sorts of so-called core workouts. People say, I'm doing my core workout today. Now I'm not saying the core is not necessarily needs to be trained, but what I'm going to pose to you is, does it need to be trained like the way it is right now? And is that even in fact doing anything, or is it even probably contributing to the problem? So firstly, I think before we get on, is we need to define what the core is. So as opposed to what you've been told, it's not just your abs. It's really a combination of small muscles that are deep underneath the big exterior muscles, and they're referred to as the inner unit, that work in combination with the large prime movers, so like quads, lats, pecs, all these sort of big moving muscles, where they work. So the inner unit working with the outer unit to provide a complex unit of stiffness, so good stiffness. So true core strength requires both to be used. You can't just work on the inner unit while the outer unit's not being involved, and you can't, and problems that come about when the outer unit tries to take over the inner unit's role. So I'm going to explain this in a bit more detail. So the inner unit's commonly referred to as these small, deep abdominal muscles, so pelvic floor, multifidus, TBA, and diaphragm, which is the diaphragm is really the big key to all of these guys being involved. So if you have a problem with breathing, then you're going to have a problem getting any of these guys to work for you. So basically, the deep abdominal muscles, the stabilizers, are really small. They're not able to generate much force in comparison to the moving muscles. For starters, they don't even connect to outer limbs to move you anyway, so they don't really have a capacity for movement. The main function is to work like what they call as a feed forward muscle, so which means it sort of anticipates you're about to move, and basically tries to stabilize the spine in particular and the body in preparation to move. So their job is to just sort of really hold things still, to say, okay, big moving muscles, you can go ahead and do it. A bit like clamping a crane to the ground before it tried to lift anything. All right, so the stabilizers of the truck keep the truck from tipping over, but they don't have actually any involvement in moving anything. Where the outer unit is a bit more complicated, obviously these are the big prime movers that are meant to actually do movement, but they do play a role in creating some stiffness, because we are primarily designed in a lot of spiral patterns. And I'd encourage you to read Anatomy Trains by Thomas Myers to see a bit more about this. But just understand that these slings, these are what we call myofascial slings, so you know, they work very much in creating stiffness within a movement in combination with the small guys. So if there's a problem with these chains or these slings, then you're going to have all sorts of trouble trying to coordinate movement very well. So this is very much how you connect the arm with the leg, and this is why we sort of run with the left arm and the right leg forward, and vice versa, and why we throw things, because this is how we create motion. It's how we sort of, this is why we don't move like a robot as such. And this is what you'll see why the problem with the core training is, and how it's done today, is it does treat you like a robot. So the slings are, there's 4 key ones. In Thomas Myers, I think he breaks it down to 7 or 8, but if I break it down, there's even simpler than that. There's an anterior sling, and there's a posterior sling. You'll see glute max and lats here are heavily involved. In this one, it's really the chest and through the adductors and the internal obliques. The deep longitudinal sling is a very complicated one. It's a bit more of a spiral pattern working vertically. And the lateral sling is a lot of the time where you see problems with SIJ problems and a lot of back problems and even knee problems where people are sort of tilting their pelvis out. All right, so these are examples of exercises that would relate to that. So why does the core get so much attention? Well, problems arise, as I mentioned before, when the inner unit doesn't hold the spine stable in preparation for movement. So the loss of balance and stability exposes the entire body to the injury. So often the outer unit will try to take over this role of stabilizing. Perfect example would be hips becoming really stiff to do what the abdominal muscles were not doing. Now, the question here is did the hips start doing it and the abdominals become weaker, or did the abdominals become weaker and the hips started doing it? It's difficult to say, but in most cases I would say it's the hips taking over the abs. You may find there's nothing wrong with the abs, it's the poor habits of things that you're doing that created the hips to stiffen in the first place. But basically understand that this is where the idea of core strength training come about, because there's an obvious weakness within the abdominal muscles that now you're trying to sort of say, well, let's plug that weakness with an exercise, which seems to make sense. So the problem with this is that people train the abs as if they're like biceps, meaning that you try to make a bicep stronger, you just do bicep curls. But the problem with this is the abs don't actually work like that, especially the inner unit. The inner unit, very much like a reflex muscle, and like we were saying before, it's a feed forward muscle. So it sort of comes in to prepare you for something, and then it would just say, okay, now we're ready, we're done. I don't need to do anything more than that. So you can see this is not a feed forward movement of any kind. This is just holding stiffness. So if this goes for too long, it just basically says to the inner unit, you're no longer required, we'll take over and we'll do the rest of it. And that's where external obliques and rectus abdominis will come in and take over instead. So, now the other thing that we want to sort of recognize here is there's a real ignorance behind the reason you became weak in the first place. So instead of saying, why did I become weak? You don't even ask the question, you just start trying to plug a hole with the exercises. There's a real ignorance also to the stiffness at the other joints and how they basically sacrifice their stability in order, so the body, the core, or the spine I should say, is going to sacrifice its stability as such. So it wasn't weak, but it's going to say, well, I'm going to have to give up what I've got because there's a problem somewhere else. So the real secret is to the core is really defining what the movement that it's lost in, and finding what's the source of the problem, why have I lost it in the first place. So my problem with core workouts is people are often blaming it, like your abdominals, for a poor movement, and there's no possible way you can blame one thing for that. The second thing is, why is the core weak in the first place? And it's not bad luck, and it's not genetics, and it's not age, and it's not all these other things. It's basically poor habits and forcing the body to sacrifice its lumbar spine stability in order to find the movement that it's lost somewhere else. So I'm going to explain what that, I'm going to give you examples in a second what that looks like. So if we look here at this golfer who's got terrible posture, he's going to have a loss of rotation. There's no way he can rotate fully on a backswing or a follow through being positioned like that. So his thoracic has gone completely rigid, and his lumbar spine is going to do the extra twisting because he can't get it from here. The lumbar spine can't do any twisting because it's not designed for that, but it's going to try it anyway because it's the last guy in the queue. There's no one after that. It's the last one. So he's giving up his core strength, as people would classify it, in order to hit the ball. So he may in fact have no weakness there. It's just that when he does this movement, he has to lose it in order to hit the ball. Otherwise, he won't be able to hit the ball very far, or not at all, because he won't have any swing. So he remains stiff at both. If he keeps his stiffness there and he's got stiffness there, how's he going to swing? So basically the body says, well, all I've got to do is I'm just going to give up what I'm usually holding on to, because I can't make this any more free because it's so rigid from all the things that he's been doing. Gym examples would be squats. So we see squats like this, and people say, oh, you've got a weak core. Now, he may in fact have a weak core, but he may in fact have stiff ankles, weak feet, maybe his tight hips, maybe even weakness through his quadriceps, or even this guy, most likely going to look at the feet here. Maybe even a thoracic problem, can't extend. That's the only position he can get into. Same with this on the deadlift. You know, this is terrible, and you're going to see herniated discs on both of these cases. To blame the core for this, though, is craziness, because it's going to be definitely like a hip problem in both of these cases, where they just can't. And maybe a brain thing. Maybe there is no mobility restriction at any of those problems that I've mentioned, and it's just their coordination of how to execute it that's the problem. And in all cases, the body will move into this position because it's the position it feels strongest with, and it will use it. So in all cases, you're sacrificing the abs to do these movements that are going to hurt you. So poor timing of stabilizers, lack of ability to use your breath, poor mobilities at the ankles, as we've mentioned, weakness within the outer unit. So like I said, it could be a glute problem even. So because you don't have the strength and the power, you're going to have to make up for it somewhere else. Poor coordination, could be all of the above. But basically understand you're sacrificing this to make up for something else. And this will not change these. No matter how good you are at that, you will not change that if that's all you know how to do. Alright, so how does it happen? Well, usually sitting is a big problem these days, so sitting poorly or sitting for too long. This is where the tonic muscles become facilitated, and that means that they get really turned on, and when they get turned on, they inhibit the weaker muscles. So tonic muscles are generally these guys here. So you'll see a few names, so pecs, upper traps, if people get a lot of neck pain, piriformis, TFL in the hips, psoas, rectus femoris, even hamstrings sort of operate as a bit of a both. And these guys are the typical weak ones, so glute max, VMO, serratus anterior, lower traps. They're all problem muscles that are really hard to strengthen because these guys are shutting them down, and they're shutting them down because of the repetitiveness of poor movement, poor habits of movement. So when you understand poor movement and you know what to look for, then you can change things. But if you're ignorant to it and you have poor teaching methods or just lack of exercise in general, you're gonna eventually end up with problems, and then people are going to blame the core, but it may not be the core at all. So poor breathing is a big one. So as I mentioned before, the diaphragm is crucial. If you don't get good understand how to create intra-abdominal pressure, you will not be able to do this very well. So then you're going to have to cheat on things, and you may use other muscles in, say, in your scalenes and even your upper traps to become breathing muscles for you to create pressure. And we see dysfunctional breathing patterns to do this, and that's where you're going to also have trouble. Compensation from the other joints, as we mentioned a few times already. So the lack of mobility will force the body to cheat. It just moves to the next joint and keeps going up until it finds how it can do the movement closest to what you want to do. So weakness of prime movers are also a problem. So you could have tightness, but a weakness could be also a problem. Big example of that would be the feet, even the glutes, and even the serratus anterior. So and this is an example of where a foot problem creates a series of chain reactions going right up the spine here. So doing these, this and this, will contribute more to this. And if you don't do enough of this, which would be the opposite, which would be sort of combining all these joints in a standing position, creating your intra-abdominal pressure, getting good hip mobility, thoracic, all the things you need are done in a deadlift really. If you do all of these things, you're going to create that, and that's going to turn into that. All right, so this posture for long enough always eventuates into that. So what can you do about it? Well, firstly, you've got to learn to move correctly, so learn how to squat, bend, lunge, etc. Learn how to use your breathing trait, intra-abdominal pressure. Learn how to activate the slings. Pay attention to the mobility of the joints that are known for getting stiffness from just poor lifestyle habits, and they're ankles, hip, and thoracic. And for core training, you would use simplified drills of movements to practice instead of just isolated abdominal exercises. So an example would be, say if I've got a problem with my arm lifting overhead, I might use a simplified way of doing a shoulder press where I can really focus on engaging my abdominal muscles in a perfect posture and pushing it overhead. So I'll give you examples of this in a video shortly that has a lot more in there. So there's a part 2 to this video that I encourage you to watch. I'll give you a sneak peek at one of them. So let's have a look.
Okay, so here's another one, say, of squatting technique. Again, people sort of, oh, you've got a weak core, that's why you're doing it so poorly. And you've got Nathan here demonstrating some good technique with the squat. So he's basically got good ankle range, he's got good hip range. So they're the things that are going to be very dependent on getting the correct angles here. So that's beautiful squat. He's got a nice neck position, he's not like cramming it. He's keeping his natural curve in his spine. Everything's good. All right. So when I ask him to demonstrate a poor one, which you'll see him do now, see how this is where someone will say, oh, you've got a weak core because you're really collapsing at the trunk there, and he definitely is. But the reason for that is not really so much to do with the abs or anything to do with the abs. It's very much to do with the ankle. Can you see? This time around, the ankle didn't even move at all, where in the first one, it was sort of heading in that direction, which gave him, he didn't have to move his bum so far back, this is really a deadlift in a way. He didn't have to move his bum so far back, he only had to move it to say there, which meant he was able to keep the angles very much parallel, and he's not having to turn his head up so he can look straight ahead. So you can see, this was often mistaken for a weak core, and it probably will develop into a weak core, but not because it was the instigator, it's because this was the effect of the cause. All right, so it's all hip action, which is what you would see in a deadlift, but there's just no movement through the ankle. So maybe the ankle's restricted, maybe the foot's too rigid or weak, maybe there's a weakness even at the knee here, through the glutes and the quads. Maybe he's moving like this to avoid pain. So he's going to sacrifice the abs to be able to do this movement, and no planks and isolated abdominal training is going to change this. And nothing other than changing it within the squat is going to change this. All right.
So I hope you got an idea of what I meant by that. Go and watch part 2 of this video, because this video is going to go too long, to get more ideas of what I'm talking about on this. And there's plenty of other videos I have where I talk a bit more about the myofascial slings, and also how to create intra-abdominal pressure for when you're using arms and legs. All right, so there's how you use your breathing to activate, and how you use the slings that I mentioned earlier. And if you want other information that's more specific to how we would use core strength training in various things, so shoulder pain, back pain, knee problems, or just general overall workouts, there's some stacks of reports that you can go to our website. Have a look in the description, because I'll put the links in there for you to show you how to do it. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed that video, and we'll see you on our next one. Make sure you watch part 2, which will be released after this one.